In one of the role plays, there was this example that actually did come up just like what you're talking about with the understanding why they want this and why now. I was the buyer and I was just being me. I wasn't pretending to be someone else. My thing I was looking for was I have a workbook that sits in a Word doc. It's ugly and it makes me not want to put it out. So I want it designed so it looks professional, it looks pretty. And then the people role playing with me, all three of them were like, how much money do you want to make from this? And I'm like, I never said I want to make any money. And they're like, what kind of price point will this be at? I'm like, well, I mean, I guess I can sell it for $19. You know what they said? Like, so many comments in the chat were like, oh, like, get out of here. Like, she doesn't even really have a workbook. Like, so much judgment. Like, they were scoffing at me, the price point. They're like, oh, she's just a cheap buyer. She's giving you the runner. I'm like, oh my God, I literally want just a pretty workbook and I will pay for you to give that to me so I can now feel not ashamed to put that out into the world as it is. It's like, you guys are thinking too hard on this.
I mean, it's almost like, again, this is that they're jumping to the things that they know, the elements they know of business, instead of creating a context to learn more from you about what you needed. For example, like my biggest question would have been, well, why does it need to be pretty? Right? Like that would have been my first question. Why? Why does it need to be pretty? Because then I can understand a bit more of, okay, what is the idea of why this hasn't been put out and how can we start to go from there? I would never jump to how much should we sell it for? I just don't understand.
No one asked me that question. There were 3 people and nobody asked me that question, like, "Why does it need to be pretty?" And then, in fact, someone in the comments even said, "If one of your friends said that they were sitting on, like, a gold mine of an idea, and they said they needed it to be pretty, like, what would you tell that person?" And I'm like, "First of all, please don't do that. Like, do not coach me without my permission. And 2, I hate that question, and all people really hate that question because that's a leading question. They know where you're trying to go with that, and again, you're trapping them into what you think is the solution. So that person clearly felt like, "It doesn't need to be pretty, put it out there." I'm like, "I think it needs to be pretty." Your question should be, "Okay, what does pretty look like to you?"
I like that. That's a next step because the thing is notice I asked you, why does it need to be pretty? I think like this person. I don't agree that it needs to be pretty. But rather than me saying that to you, I want to understand why. Why do you think it needs to be? Because that's going to give me more understanding. And I think a lot of times in calls, what people do is they take what they think about the situation and they immediately insert it on a person instead of asking and getting a reply, which might be different than what you think. It might be totally different, like it could be a completely different reason why you want it to be this way. I don't know. But yeah, I feel like we kind of we kind of went off the road from this.
Sorry.
To wrap it up, we've got our pre-frame. We've got our where we started to go into what we call the meat of the conversation, the fundamental foundation of what's going on. And then I think the one part I wanna finish with, keeping in mind there's a lot more anyone listening can get from this. You have to go follow Jewel, okay? You have to come follow me because this is a huge conversation, but I would love to put this piece in because I think it's the hardest one, which is how do you transition to the offer, to the sale? If we go back to the example of you being with this stylist, would have been the way that you would have liked to have heard about her offer or how she works with people?
Okay, this is where I'm like, "Oh, I wonder if Sade has a different perspective here." You've actually been in sales as, like, a real job, whereas I haven't. I've done sales as, like, peripheral portions of my previous jobs. But in my opinion, if you have done your job at establishing rapport, trust, you've been a good listener, you have gotten that person to tell you everything about themselves, you don't even have to transition to the offer because they will do it for you. They'll say, "Oh my gosh, like, can you help me with this? Like, how much does this cost?" Every single client I've signed, it's been like that. So remember, a lot of these people, they'll come to the call almost pre-sold. They just need to like tick the boxes that you're not a weirdo. Like that's really all this is. And maybe they want a little proof that you can do what you say you can do. But like in my mind, I'm like, so the other picture I have, of it's not the dancer on the stage. It's more like here's the buyer and here's you, the seller, and you're like building a bridge from opposite ends. And the thing that most people don't understand is that you, as the seller, you almost have to do nothing. Like if you just let that person talk, they will build the bridge all the way to you and then, come all the way to you. Like that's the secret that I think people don't get. But like, what about you? Like, do you actually formally transition to an offer?
Sometimes. So I feel like the analogy you just gave is amazing because the stylist you were talking to, she burned fire on the bridge.
Yeah, like, I kept trying to put planks down, and she was just like, like, smashing them.
She kept burning them down. I think it's a great analogy, so let's keep going with it, where some people come to the call or to this checkout page because not everyone's gonna have a sales call with you, right? Some people are just going to buy your digital product or your physical product, and some people will come with their bridge already basically there, and they don't need as much incentive. Other people are further back along. So, for the people you're talking about, where you structured the conversation in a way where you establish your credibility, you're listening, all of that, you communicated what you do in a way that resonates, they naturally ask, okay, what is the next step? In the case where they don't do that, I would always say, do you have questions for me? I wanna now leave it open for you. Do you have questions for me? And the first one is always gonna be, how much is it or how does it work? Almost always. And so that's how I would often transition into it. And then from there, you can also do a second opt in, like we're talking about, where you say, okay, do you want me to tell you about my program or about this? So you're the first opt-in is they're saying, "Yeah, I wanna know how much it is." But the second one is, "Can I also tell you about it?" Because then it's a double yes for whatever you're gonna say next.
Oh, that is so good. Dude, you're smooth, man. It's, like, so good. And I'm realizing too that sometimes I reach, like, what feels an awkward point in the conversation, and I usually do default to, "Do you have any questions for me?" I feel like I've been talking or, like, I wanna make sure your time is, like, feeling productive here. So that's my fallback, but I didn't realize like that's actually the way you do it. You're right. Cause when I say, do you have any questions? They almost always do say, yeah, like, so either how much is it or how does it work? Or can you help me? I've heard all three versions. Sometimes the person will be like, nope. And I'll be like, okay. This is why a closed end question doesn't always work so great because then you dead ended and there's nowhere to go.
And then you can ask the second one is, "Well, do you want me to tell you about this?" And that's where you're gonna get a good indication of how you did or how ready they are to buy. Because if they say, "Not really, I feel like I got enough here," that might mean they're still gonna buy, you don't actually know, or it could mean, "Nope, it's I figured out it's not for me," but either way, your job is not to sell them, I think is the fundamental thing here, like, your job is never to sell someone on a sales call, which sounds silly to say, but it's about helping them assess, and you too, whether it even makes sense for the sale to go forward, because the moment that they buy is after they leave that call or when you send the checkout page or whatever it is. It's not like you're not trying to get them to physically buy on the call, and this is why I really struggle so much. I hate those people that do the thing where like, "Okay, you're ready to buy. Let's open a checkout page. Give me your credit card." To me, that is so foul, and I can't stand that. I really, really dislike that strategy because someone will do it, but then they're coming from a point of being forced and not guided to what you're offering.
Okay, so in your opinion, how should someone approach that step with you?
The checkout bit.
Yeah.
So, I think once someone establishes you've said, "Let me tell you about the program. What do you think about this? This is how it would help, and this is where" you're bringing in all the words they've already told you. I would even be jotting down some words sometimes, some phrases, and communicating my solution in the way that they express their problems, and then I would say, "Okay, this is about the program. Now, if it's okay with you, like, do you want me to give you the page to buy?" And I could either drop it in that call, the link, or I could email it after. I could say, if I get the sense that maybe someone's has some things they need to go through, I would send an email afterwards. And in that email, I would actually communicate one of the things that I sense was their biggest objection. And I've had that happen before where I could tell that someone was maybe not ready yet. They felt like they didn't have the time. And in that email, I would say this and then give them the checkout. Yes, you might lose some sales, but I feel like it doesn't tarnish your soul.
Okay, okay. So in this specific example where the objection is time, what are you writing in that email?
So in that email, then I would describe the way that we break this down is you're doing X amount of hours per week on this. This is why it takes this amount of time because of the strategy I'm giving you. If you feel like you have this amount of time, then we can make it work. And almost always, like, time is something that is an objection you can work through for almost anything. Almost anything. It's not a really strong, solid objection that can't be maneuvered if someone wants something enough. So that's the one where I would put in, yeah, like, I would really break down why it will not take the time you think it's going to.
And that last part being, is it usually shorter than the time they think, or is it longer? Like what?
I think because well, it depends on the objection, right? Like, if someone thinks, for example, I had this in wellness, people would think, "It's not possible that in 60 days I can feel different about my body." They would think it would take longer, they would need more time, and so then that sense of time is different. I have to communicate why these things change in that time frame, and that it sets you up for a longer transformation later. But there's also the objection of, "Well, I don't feel like I have enough time to work on my podcast," for example. And in that case, I have to explain, okay, we can get it down to 2 to 3 hours a week in the beginning by doing XYZ, these things. And that then falls on them to say, can I do 2 to 3 hours a week? Versus when you say you don't have enough time, your concept of it is not defined. So when someone puts a number on it, it allows you to assess, is this real problem for me or is it something else?
Oh, that is so good, man. And I think what you're touching upon this is you're really making it concrete because, and this is how I feel about feelings in general. Most people are so busy dreading how they think they'll feel. It's a weird thing because a lot of people fall into like disaster thinking, right? So in this instance, it's gonna take too much time, and then you're clearing that mystery up. It's sort of like how when you were a child, I don't know if you ever were afraid of the dark. I was massively, and I totally fell into the thing where, when the lights are off, the things that are in the room are normal, and then yet in the dark, they suddenly look like monsters. So it's just like turning on the light and showing them what's really there, and then they can decide. So same thing with feelings. It's like, oh, I think that's gonna be horrible. I'm gonna feel ashamed or I'm gonna look incompetent. And I'm like, well, if you're gonna do the disaster thinking, let's take it all the way through so you can see like if this is actually real or not. But people will stop like they'll stop halfway through, which I think is a problem.
This is where I wanna reference there's an episode on Feel Good Naked with Joel that I'll link where you talk about this, taking the disaster thinking through. And while we were speaking more on wellness and mindset, I think it definitely applies here. The idea of how bad can it get? And when you go through that thinking, almost always is never as bad as you think. Almost always. Almost always. But I feel like we have to stop the conversation here because otherwise this is gonna be a season. I wanna thank you so much for coming on and doing this and sharing what is an extremely actionable strategy. If people use any of this in sales, any of the tidbits, it's going to improve the way you connect with people. And I just really wanna thank you for doing that. Let everyone know where they can connect with you, where they can find out more.
Oh, thanks. Sure, Day. This was super fun. I feel like our topic may have gone in a different direction than we expected. I'm like, oh gosh, but you're such an easy person to talk to. Like one of my favorite podcasters ever, for real. So thanks again for inviting me on this journey here. Connect with me on TikTok or LinkedIn, especially LinkedIn. Yeah, that's where I'm trying to grow these days. Thank you.